Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm here to review George A. Romero's Resident Evil. And this is a new documentary from director Brandon Salisbury, which focuses on what could have been this version of the Resident Evil film directed by zombie film legend George A. Romero, who was a big influence on the games in the first place. And then what we wound up getting, which was a big action movie, horror-esque Paul W.S. Anderson series of films. But this is the big what if. And getting straight to the point, like, this is a fascinating perspective. Like, this could have been really cool and a really interesting adaptation of something like Resident Evil. And that's exciting, and that's honestly what really drew me into wanting to check out this documentary in the first place. But to be honest, this almost 2-hour documentary is a big, clunky mechanism for trying to tell this story. So it does focus on those elements of like how this was going to come about for maybe a fourth of this movie. This film really takes its time setting up who George A. Romero was, and honestly, this film is kind of less about Resident Evil and his Resident Evil film, and just trying to reinforce how much of a legend George A. Romero is, which I'm not going to dispute. He was the godfather of zombie films and created so many great horror films. But like, this film, after a while, just kind of felt like a giant, like, ego-stroking ad for George A. Romero. And it's just like, it's not what you're doing when you're trying to make a documentary here. And especially because, like, this tries to sell this as the film about his Resident Evil. And I think specifically for the behind the scenes of this Resident Evil film with George A. Romero attached to it, you get like 15 minutes. You get a really in-depth exploration of Resident Evil as a game, which I appreciated that. It gave a lot of context to it. And then it like goes right past like, yeah, they dumped him. And then go into Paul W.S. Anderson's film. But the biggest challenge about this film is just straight up from the filmmaking and storytelling perspective. It has these horror-esque dramatizations and how things are staged and the music that just feels hokey and kind of cheesy instead of feeling like this eerie horror-esque atmosphere that they're trying to craft for a documentary. And it just kind of makes it feel very cheap and just they're trying to push a very specific kind of like cliche of, ooh, we're talking about horror films and horror video games, we're going to make this feel like a horror film, and it just feels clunky and weird. And then the ungodly amount of voiceover in this documentary, like they'll put clips up and like quotes up on the screen and then have to talk over them to tell you what's on the screen. It just, why are you putting up like clips and dialogues and quotations and then having somebody voice over it too? It's just overdoing it. And yes, like, it just feels so clunky and overdone, and also the narration in this is so dry. And not gonna lie, there's a lot of stretches of this film that were extremely boring and really unengaging because it was just somebody in a very monotone voice-overing things that we were seeing on the screen anyway. And it's just like, it's a film. It's a visual medium. You don't have to voice over these clips. Like, yes, there's like voiceover work if you can't see. But you don't do that on top of everything. And then there's a decent chunk of this film where it's basically them just reading George A. Romero's script. And it's just like, you don't make a film about somebody reading off of a piece of paper and just talking at the audience. And it just feels so unengaging and clunky. And just from a filmmaking and storytelling perspective, this film really tries to alienate you as a viewer. And it has a fascinating story to tell, and it chooses so many different ways to be uninteresting about it. The subject of this, and if you really care about it, you'll weather the storm and get through it and learn a few things. But if you're just watching this as a film, as a documentary, you're going to be so disconnected because it's drawn out and just lazily put together in terms of how it's telling its story that you're going to want to not finish this. And also, this hour and 52 minutes feels like forever. So I don't know if this film really accomplishes what it's trying to do, because it really alienates the viewer from sitting through and learning about this situation. And it just feels like unfocused and feels like it's trying to spend too much time on certain things when the core of this idea is this what if film, and not enough of this runtime actually gets devoted to it. But those are my thoughts on George A. Romero's Resident Evil. Let me know what you think, and let's talk some movies. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.